Good morning, welcome back to this Dynamo Advanced course. Today we're gonna kick off a new part of the course where we talk about API and how to access API through Python inside Dynamo. It's a really powerful workflow because once you learn how to use Python to access the API, then you can use it with any other programming language, for example C#. So you can start to understand how you can use Dynamo in Python to kind of draft a workflow, and then once you are ready you can move that into a production workflow using API, creating add-ins. So to be able to do that, we need to start to have a look into some tool which is really. I made sure that we have some information before we really start to dig into how to develop. So if I've pulled out some interesting website that we need to have as a reference for now. So first of all, what is object-oriented programming? So Python is an object-oriented programming language, and if you check on Wikipedia or the really thousands of explanation of what object-oriented programming is, you notice that the OOP, what is called object-oriented, is based on concept of objects, and objects are elements, are things that can contain data and can contain functions to manage these data. So we had a look into function previously in this course, but we didn't really think about how to use these functions and how to use this function to manage data attached to objects. So the object is really something that can include both data and the methods to access and manage that data. Why this is so important? It is important because everything inside Revit is an object. So if you think about, for example, I can open this new one, and I can, for example, have a point by coordinates. So this node is actually an object, and the data attached to these objects are X, Y, and Z. So those are the properties related to the object points. And if we want to access, for example, the X value, we can access this value just typing the object name, which in this case is P, as an instance of this point, and then we can access the property of this point just naming the property X, because as we know, the point itself can be created by coordinates, and the way we create this point is actually creating 2 or 3 numbers, depending if we want a 2D point or a 3D point, and these 3 values are actually X, Y, and Z. So don't be confused between this capital X, because this capital X, as you can see, has a different color by the simple X, just because this one is a parameter and this one is the variable, and as you can see, these variables are coming as an input for this code block, like they are coming as an input for this specific node. So whenever we use this dot notation, we are accessing an object, and sometimes we access a property of that object, and sometimes we access a function of that object. So for example, again, if we have a curve, we can create a curve by points. It's not really this one. Probably the point example is the right one. So if we use this dot X, we are accessing a property, but if we use this class name dot a function name, we are accessing what we call a method. So at the same time, we have an object, which is the point, and an object can have parameters or properties and can have methods to be created. In this case, this by coordinates is also called a constructor of the object, because we are using this function to create a new object based on the what we call the base point class in this case. Why we need to understand this very deeply? Because, as I said, everything inside Revit is an object, and we need to be able to read these libraries of objects to be able to use that. So this library of objects is available and is public available, of course, and is available through the website revitapidocs.com. And here you can see that we have different versions of the same library, just because every year we have new functionalities available through the API. On the left side of this website, you can see we have a namespace, and the namespace for me is actually, if we want to have a similarity, is actually our library. So we can go to the library and access some specific book, which then will be a specific namespace, and then once we access the right namespace, then we can open a book, and then we can read the pages of this book. So whenever we access a different level of this library, we are using a dot notation, and then and sometimes we can access a method which will be identified by this icon, which is a cube, and sometimes we access properties, which is then identified by this other icon. Actually, the API documentation is really well organized, because as you can see, you can have methods, and you will see which one are the methods available, and sometimes you have properties, and you will see that this one is a property. So if we go back to the Revit lookup, I just want to show you what are the similarities. I select this object again and just snoop the current selection. If I just enlarge a bit this window, I can see that we have available here methods, and those are the methods available for the walls. And if we go down deep in this window, we have properties, which then will be the properties available for the window. Let's go back to the, for example, let's see this width information here. So let's go back to the API documentation. Let's look for the wall class. And once we access the wall class, we can see that we have methods available for the wall, and we have properties available for the wall. So the width property is the same that we can see through this window in the Snoop catalog, which is this one exactly. And if we check for a method, for example, can be locked, and we go back to the API, oops, I chose the wrong one, and we go under the method. Well, actually here we have some differences, and I'll probably pick the wrong example, because the methods available here are just constructors. But if we click on wall methods, we can see that we have can be locked. So identifies if the element can be locked or not. Actually, this one is probably not the best example, but we'll see other examples for this one. So it's just to give you an idea that whatever is available through the API is most likely available through the Revit documentation, and vice versa. So if you use the Revit lookup, you have a very good understanding on how to access this Revit API. So let's park now the Revit API docs, and let's try to have a look into the Dynamo environment. So let me just open Dynamo. Let me remove this one, and let me open what I already prepared for this course. Let me open lesson 4. It is actually the same old Python script that we use for other lessons. So let me try to edit this one, and this is actually an example of how to create a class. So we're not really going to create any class for this course because we don't really need it, but it's kind of important to understand how a class definition is created in order to understand how to access the classes available through the Revit API. So as you can see, this is the most common example on how to create a class in Python or any other language. So we have a person, and the person is the object itself, and then we have bunches of parameters or properties for this person, for example the name and the age of the person. And then we have some methods, for example print hello my name is, and plus the name, the value of this parameter. So a class is defined using the terminology. The word class, as you can see, is green because is a name, is a Python name. Then we provide a name for the object, and then we define some specific methods. Some of them are constructors, some of them are just function, as this one, for example. So then whenever I want to call this function, I can instantiate a new object for this. So if I want to create a second person, for example, I can provide the name of the class, and then I need to provide the two value. So this self value is actually the way we access inside values of the classes. Again, I don't want to focus too much on how to create classes for Python, because this is not what I want to do in this course, but you kind of need this self value to be able to access the constructor's value. So the person, let's say, is Jose, and the age is 35, and then we can say p2.myfunc, because this is the way we want to call the function, and then we don't need to provide any information to this function, just because the function itself will recall the information available inside the properties available inside the class, and then we'll access the name and just put the name as a return of this function. So to be able to see it in Dynamo, we just need to output this value. So we can output p2.myfunc, and then just run it. And if we open this one, we can say that hello, my name is Jose. And if we change this one again, if we want to print out P1, sorry, we can run this one, and this one will be like that, or we can print both of them. So we can print p2.myfunc together with the other one, and then we print out as a list. But this one is specifically for Python. Really is not related to any code that Python can read. So again, it's really important to understand the dot notation and the difference between the properties and the methods, but we will get there using all the different API available within the project. So the next example I wanna try to show you is again this specific wall that we are using in the exercise. So this is the typical example of using the Dynamo out-of-the-box core nodes to access some specific value. So what it does, it grabs the categories walls, and then it just collect all of them. In this case we have only one wall, and then we access a specific parameter for that wall, which is called base offset. It's exactly the same if we go and we select this element here, then we access this base offset through the interface, or we select this Revit lookup table, we access the wall, and by the way you can see that 3272 is exactly the same value that we saw here as an ID, and then we go back then we go back, if I can, then we can go back here and access the parameters, and after we access the parameters we can go under the base offset, and then we can see that the value is exactly 0 as we expect it to be. So I want to give you the same example using the Revit API, which will give me an opportunity to introduce you with several other things. So let's close this this window here, and let's move to this other part of the script. So I already kind of try to develop this node just to avoid any live issue with the developments, and so I would just want to inspect what I've already built in this script. So this will give me an opportunity to introduce you some of these statements that are available here. First of all, what is the CLR and why we use the CLR? So again, I have a small website here available. If you go under, if you search for IronPython, actually IronPython is the Python available for the Windows environment, and is the is the Python deployment that is able to access the .NET framework. The .NET framework is what actually runs in the background of the Windows environment. So the CLR, which stands for Common Language Runtime, is, again, if we go under the Wikipedia, is a virtual machine component that manages the execution of .NET programs. So that means if you want to run a program on the .NET environment, which means you want to run a program on the Windows environment, you need some kind of translator between what we call a high-level language, which maybe it can be Python or it can be C# or any other high-level language, and you need something that can compile that language into something that is understandable and comprehensible by the machine, which is the managed code. So we need some kind of translator, and the Common Language Runtime environment is what can convert this between these two languages. So we need the CLR, and to be able to have the CLR available in our environment, we need to import the CLR. Then we have another import which is pretty much always useful, and is the system information. So with the sys information we can access all the let's say file systems functionalities and methods, for example to read file information, to create new directories, to do any kind of to perform any kind of task on the file server, or to retrieve information about the operating systems, or to use files and whatever is related to input and output on the file system. So I usually import this as a, even if I'm not really using this statement in my script, I usually have it as a kind of template. So once we import the common language runtime, we can then leverage the add reference method of the CLR library to be able to import other libraries. For example, the protogeometry, and the protogeometry we already had we already used this one when we want to access any kind of geometry related operation inside Dynamo. But the most important one for now on really, is the Revit API. So the Revit API is the namespace that will give us access to the backbone of Revit APIs. So whenever we look into this namespace, if we go up into this big list, the Revit API DLL library will give us access to mostly all of them, and specifically whatever is under the DB namespace, which stands for database. We have another DLL which we can use, and is the Revit UI API, or Revit API UI is the right way to do it. And this one will give us access not to a specific project environment, but will give us access to the user interface environment, which means we can access some specific functionalities of the application environment and not of the project environment. We're not really going to use too much this. We will focus on the database environment, and whenever you want to use a specific namespace environment, you need to access that one. For example, there are specific namespaces for analysis, there are specific namespaces if you want to manage with electrical things, there are specific namespaces, and so that means methods and classes to access lightings, mechanical, plumbing, point cloud, structure, pretty much whatever is available through the interface. Just bear with me that Autodesk is not exposing 100% of the API through the development kit. They are exposing more or less, I would say 95 or even something more, but not 100%. So every year there is a new What's New API which will provide you with the list of the new available API for developers. And that's why also you can see that we have multiple versions of the documents, and that's because some of the methods might be available in a newer version, but they might not be available in a previous version. So always make sure that whenever you try to use a specific class and a specific method, it is available for the version you want to compile to. We don't have that real issue because we're trying to use the latest version always. So we are using the Revit API. If we want to use the UI, we can just add a new line here as add reference, and then we use Revit API UI, and that's it. But as I said, at this specific stage we don't really need it, so we can, for example, put a comment here with a dash and keep it for later. The other one really important is this Revit services. So the Revit services DLL is the engine that provides you with access to the document and to the transactions. So remember when I said that Revit is a relational databases, and so that means every time you want to perform some kind of operation on the database, you need to create a transaction. why you need to create a transaction? That's because Revit want to make sure that there are no two tasks at the same time that access the same object, which will then lead to an error, for example. So we have a transaction, and every single task that will modify the database, and remember, not reading the database but just modifying the database, we need to make sure that is encapsulated into a specific transaction. But again, we will get there. So this example is pretty simple. Just let me modify some text here. So this specific script will just grab the active document, for example. We'll just make available some information about this document, for example, the name, the specific path to this document, the title, and if this document is work shared or not. So let me try to step each one of these once at a time. So let me remove this one. So to be able to do that, we need to use the Revit services. I don't want to go into the detail about this one, but you remember that if we want to import all the functionalities available through a specific DLL, we use the star, and in this case we are importing all the geometries. We don't really need this one for this because we are not trying to modify any geometry. From the Revit services persistence namespace, we import the document manager, which will give us the ability to access the document information. And from the transaction, we want to import the transaction manager. Again, we're not really using this one at this stage, so we don't really need it. What we need, for example, is to access all the functionalities of the Revit database, because we want to use that. So if I run this this specific one, I can see that document work shared is not available because we are not reading all the information from here. So let me just, for example, uncomment also this one, maybe. Let's run on line 20. Oh yeah, just because I didn't use this, I didn't fill this one as a variable. So let me just comment all of this for now. Just want to make sure that we do a step-by-step exercise. So I can run this one, and then I'm expecting a 0. So the first output I can think about is the object related to the document. As you can see, we use the document manager to access the active instance of the document. So if I grab the document value here and I run this one, I have a document object, which doesn't really say anything to me, because what we want to do, we want to access a specific information of the of that specific document. So let's go back a moment to the I will jump quite often between the two, the documentation and Revit lookup, for example. And let me see the document class, for example. So if we can see that the document class has different methods, as we saw before. We can create some object in the documents, and those are the methods, and then we can access some properties of the document class, for example. Just we need to have a bit of understanding, because these namespace is to create new object in the document, but we're not really accessing the document creation namespace. So if you type again document class, you you can access the other document namespace, which is available sorry, through this let me go up, which is available through the Autodesk Revit DB interface namespace. So if we go to the document class here, and we see we have other methods, we can delete something from a document. For example, we can close the document, the active document. We can have a couple of information. We can load an object into the active document. So pretty much what we can do from the interface. Plus we have some properties. So one of these is, for example, the title of the document, and as you can see, this explains that that's the document title. It provides you with the type of information you are retrieving, which is a string, and then you can have also sometimes some example. But what I really want to show you is that you can access the same exact information through the Revit lookup. So how you can do that? There are multiple ways. One is to access the application level, and under the application level you have the documents, which, because you can have more than one document open. In this case we only have one document, and between all the properties of this document you can find, if we go under the properties here, we can see the title is PRJ. We can access the same going from another way, just selecting the object. We know that the object belongs to a specific document, which is the active one, and that's exactly the same way we can do that. But in this case we want to use Dynamo to access the document object and then, for example, retrieve the document title. How we do that? We access the object, then we use the dot notation, and then we type the name of the properties. So the difference of calling a property and calling a method is that we usually use for a method the parentheses plus some parameter, or the parentheses without parameter if it's not required a parameter. So if we see something like this without parentheses, that means we are trying to access a property of the object. So let's try to print out the document title now. So the document object, and then we print out the document title. Just make sure you don't have any typo, and then run it. So we were expecting PRJ, and that's exactly what we will retrieve from this specific object. So let's close this one, and in this example I was trying to access the information about the work shared, so if the model is work shared or not. So again, going back to the document, is work shared is a property, and this property is bool, that means it's true or false, and this identifies if the object is work shared or not, so if we have work set or not. Same, if we go back to the interface, we can go from the object, we select the current selection, we access the document, and then we see that is linked, is work shared is false, because we don't have really work set on this one, which is right. We can access other information. Is model in the cloud if it's available in BIM 360, if it is linked, if it is a family document or is a project document. As you can see, there are, most of them are false, just because for example, is not linked, is not in the cloud, is not a family document, and is not detached because it's not coming from a work shared model. So let's see how Dynamo will recognize this document. So if we go here, I can just remove this from here, and then doc work shared, which is my value, is accessing this specific property. So I just copy this one, I will place it here, and then I run it. I was expecting false, and false it is. So as you can see, it's very, very simple to understand this kind of information. Then you can use this information to print out some message, for example, which will be available or can drive another choice or something like that. So for example, if document work share is false, that means that we want to print out that the work set are not enabled, otherwise work set enabled. And then for example, we can access all the work sets if we need to. Oops, enabled. So then we can print this message out to the output and run it. So work set not enabled, just because we know that it's false. So we can also compose this one saying that for example, project PRJ has not work set enabled, and blah blah blah. But this is just to give you a very brief introduction about what is an object, what's the difference between properties and methods. We didn't use really methods at this stage, and how to access using the dot notation the object properties or methods, and then use them to drive our workflow. So let me save this one. The next part of the script is a bit more, I wouldn't say complicated, but it has more information inside. So we're still using the import CLR, the import sys, and then we want to import some specific library which is available through the IronPython libraries, and this one is the math library, for example, because sometimes we need some mathematical operation on our data, and that's the way you usually import the math library. It's available under library, is available under the IronPython 2.7, which is the IronPython version that is shipped with Dynamo, and is the only version you can access when you want to use IronPython. There's actually a newer version like 2.7.5 or 6 or whatever, but there's no Python 3 available for IronPython. So when you try to create some script and you want to use some functionality available only in Python 3, just remember that that's not available through IronPython, which is the only way we can develop in Windows environment applications. I didn't really find any big limitations, except we don't have all the libraries that are available for Python, what we call CPython. For example, all the data management libraries like Panda or NumPy, or all the artificial intelligence packages like TensorFlow, or all these other things. There's always a way to work around this limitation, because I don't really think that we need to manage the data inside Dynamo. We can always use Dynamo to extract the data, and then we can have a proper Python setup outside to use all the libraries that we want. So then we use just Python or C# or whatever to extract information from the project, and then manipulate this this information outside the project. We really use Python inside Dynamo if we wanna manage geometries and not really data. So again, the first part of this script, except this library, is pretty much the same. So we import protogeometry, we import Revit API, we import Revit services to be able to access transactions and to be able to access the document, for example, and then we use the Revit DB to access all the properties and methods available for the objects. Then at this point I'm not reading again the document. I'm using a previous output from the previous one, previous node, sorry, to grab the document information. Is actually available at the number 0 of the list, and then we can just link these two. So if I disconnect this one is our document, and then we can grab this as an input. We don't really need it. We can just embed the same first part of the previous script inside the script, but it's just to give you an idea how to do it. So then we just initiate some variable, wall names, wall areas, wall volumes, wall lengths, and blah blah blah. So then the next part is what we call a collector. So the collector is exactly what we were looking using this node. So element of category, all element of category is actually what we call a filtered element collector. So how the filter element collector is created? Let's go back to the Revit API documentation and let's do filtered element collector class. So remember that the filter element collector is one of the most used classes when it comes to develop in the Revit API, because it's the way you collect elements filtered by some kind of criteria you want to use. So for example, the filter element collector, we look into the constructors and we look into the first constructor. We have multiple of them, but I just want to focus on the first one. So the filter element collector just wants as an input the document, and we are providing the active document. We can provide, for example, a linked document if we want to collect elements from a linked document, or we can provide BIM 360 document if we want to. Then is shipped with several different methods, and for example, we can decide to filter only the type elements. We can decide to filter only the instance elements, or we can provide more complex filters, which I'm not touching now. We probably touch later, to be able to collect elements in the project. So what I wanna really do in this project is to collect all the instances of the wall that are available in my active document. So I'm not really interested in the types of walls. I'm more interested in the elements itself. So I will use a method called where element is not an element type, for example. And then we have some other information we need to provide to that. So if we go back here, we initiate a new variable called collector, might be called anything, and then we use the filter element collector, which is provided by the Revit namespace. We checked on the document that we need to provide a document, and this is exactly what we are providing here. And then we said we wanna not the element type, but then we need to provide which category we wanna serve. And then we need to use this other method which will provide of category. And most important, we need to remember that Revit API is provided with some built-in category, and each built-in category has a specific name. So let's go back to the document and let's find the method of category, which is here. And then of category wants as an input a built-in category. The good thing about the documents is that we can click on this built-in category if we don't really know exactly what it is, and that will give us the opportunity to go in the documents where the built-in category is explained, and we can see that this is exactly the list of all categories available through the Revit API. But there's one more thing. If we go back, because the filter element collector is really important, is also provided with an example. So we can see that we have an example for C#, which is really pretty similar to what we are doing in Python. And we can see that we have collector. We don't have to provide the type with Python. We don't need to use the new statements with Python, which we need to use with C#. But what I'm interested into is this filter element collector on the document. And then, because we want to filter the category, in this case is doors, but in our case is walls, we need to provide which built-in category we want to filter. So if we go back again to our script, our collector is made by different statements. We can actually split this one into multiple statements, saying collector dot of category and blah blah blah. I usually don't do that, but I do only in one statement. And then we really read this one as the collector is equal to all the elements in the documents of category walls that are not element type. And that's exactly what I'm looking using these two nodes as an out of the box. We don't need to use Python, but this is a very good example on how to start to use. And then we need to cycle through all the elements that are inside the collector. Might be 1, might be 0, might be 1000, might be any number, which using this for loop we can cycle through that, and then we can say just collect all the wall names inside the wall names variable, collect all the wall area inside the wall areas, and so on. There is another step we need to take. Into this journey, because we need to access the parameters area which belongs to this element itself. So again, let's go back to the this time to the Revit interface. So let me close this one. Let me go inside the current selection. So this is the wall. Then we want to access the parameters, and then we want to access the area. But what is exactly this parameter? So this parameter has an internal definition, which this time is not a built-in category but is a built-in parameter, and this is the name of the built-in parameter. It has a value and it has a type. So what we want to really access is the value of this parameter, and to access that we can access that sometimes in different ways. So if we want to access the real number, we can extract that number as a value, as a double. If we want to extract that as a string, which is exactly the thing that we can see in the interface, then we can extract that value as a value string. The difference is really important because Revit always thinks in imperials. So that means that this number has to be multiplied by a constant value to convert this value into meters if we want to think about meters. But when we see the number in the interface, Revit already converted that number into the project unit value. So if I go back into my script, I can see that once I cycle through all the objects, I can access the name using this instance c.name, and I can access a parameter using this method called getParameter on the C instance, and then I want to access this specific parameter, and I want to extract that parameter as a value string. The same I want to do for the volume, but for the length I want to extract that length as a number, which will then be provided in imperial units, so I can multiply that value to convert back that number into a metric value. And then cycling through all of them, I will just append a new value to the list, and then I can print out all the elements as oh, there's something wrong here. Let me see what's wrong. Oh, I didn't run. So if I open this one, I can see that the name is wall 1. I can I have only one wall in the project, so that's pretty it. So I can see this 5.60, which is exactly what I saw through the Revit lookup. I can see this 1.12. I didn't query this value, but you can imagine that is right. And I can have this 1.4. So if I select this object, I can see this 5.6, 1.12, and 1.4, or 1400 millimeters. If I remove that conversion here, just using this, and I save this one, I ran this one, this value is completely different because it is in imperial. So just remember and bear in mind that whatever is an area, whatever is a volume, and whatever is a length is provided with internal values, which means imperial, and you have to convert that if you want to see it. There are utilities to do that in the API, but I will go to that a bit later. So let me remove this one and save the change. What I can do now is just make it smaller, go into the automatic one, and then I can create a similar, and then I can just create multiple walls, and this one should really provide me with the new information about the new walls. Again, nothing special, nothing really complicated. We can do that exactly in the same way using this one. For example, asking for the length, and inside this this node there's already a conversion using the Revit API utilities. We'll get there again, but that's really it. So we're doing exactly the same thing using the API. Why to do that? Because you have more control on how you want to manage your data and how you want to process your data before providing that data outside. With that said, I will conclude this lesson 4 for now. So next time we'll go a bit further and we'll try to use some to place some geometry in the project. Thank you again, and see you next time.